Kirana Marorere, Urinaka, Namaste, and Assalamu Alaikum. Assalamu Alaikum is an Arab greeting, and it's actually being threatened in Samoa, where the church are moving to try and ban the practice of Muslim worship. And the role of the media in that country is very, very important. So I greet you in the language of the ancestors and the future as well. My name is Fuimaono. I'm a Director of Transparency International. The session that we are going to be participating in relates to something which is fundamentally crucial to successful development in the Pacific. As the world becomes even more intensely interested in what's going on in the Pacific, as we all know, a number of international treaties have been signed. There's international interest in the Pacific from the European Union, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank. The South Pacific Forum has got massive interest from foreign donors. Where all these resources are going to is actually very crucial to the success of development. And the role of the media to try and trace where the money goes is probably one of the biggest challenges, aside from global climate change, aside from the depleting fishery resources that we have being researched and analysed now, to the threats to our cultural identity. Corruption is very much like cancer. It's got to be treated early, otherwise it's going to be massive, expensive interventions at the other end, as we see in Africa, as we see in Asia, as we see in South America. So what I would like to do is for this conference, I'm going to stand here. I'm not going to repeat what I've said. Hopefully you remember what I've said. Transparency International is really pleased to work with the Pacific Media Association to bring this forum to this conference. The formal part of the conference starts tomorrow, but it's important that we discuss what I think is one of these long-ranging issues that has to be dealt with. And so you as practitioners, you as researchers, you as business owners, and journalists and lecturers and academics, your role in the future of this discussion, this debate in the Pacific is crucial. But there's some fundamental questions. How bad is the situation? So for those of us who've been paying attention, for those of us who've actually been watching what's happening in the Pacific, 2 weeks ago, the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu was sent to jail for receiving backhanders from Asian businessmen. Earlier this year, the former President of the French Polynesia was sentenced to jail and fined for misusing his power by essentially paying a radio station to run a campaign for a government, for a political party. He was found out, and then he tried to backtrack fast. But he's been caught out essentially because the media got onto that story and exposed him and his behaviour. Last year, Gaston Floss who's also the former president of French Polynesia, he was sentenced to imprisonment as well for misuse of power. The stories go on and on. The misuse of power is essentially the essence of what corruption is about. And as recently as maybe last week, a 16-year-old girl in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, she put on her Facebook a very, very strongly worded criticism of the government's handling of some disturbances in the highlands. Now, 16-year-old Facebook, who really cares? But she was taken into custody by the authorities, questioned as to why she is criticising the government, detained for some hours, and Alex here has led the story on this. And it shows that the reach of central authority into even the highlands of Papua New Guinea is tremendous and dangerous. So to answer some of the questions that I'm going to pose, like how bad is the situation, what is the media doing about it? What are the challenges that they face? Who's leading the charge? I have had the privilege of meeting these gentlemen before us and discussing with them the opportunity to come and tell their stories. So it is with a great amount of pleasure that I am able to introduce to you three eminently wise journalists. Now one of them is probably the youngest editor of any Pacific media outlet, Alex Rennie. Alex is the editor of the Post Courier. It's a national newspaper in Papua New Guinea. He had worked there before. He was a communications advisor to the British Embassy in Port Moresby before heading to Australia to complete a master's degree at the University of Sydney. He is very qualified to comment on the state of the media in Papua New Guinea because he's also the head of the Papua New Guinea Media Council. And they have been very vigorous in their comments, their observations about how government uses its power. And so it is with a great deal of gratitude and pleasure that I introduce Alex to you. We also have an old battler from the last century, and he's still alive, Kalefi Moala. He's the publisher and director of Daily Media Network in Doma. He's been a long-time campaigner for media freedom in the Pacific region, and he's written books on this subject as well. So he's observed some major changes in Tonga as well. One of the curious things is that happened in Tonga a couple of years ago is that there was a new standing committee established for Parliament called the Standing Committee on Corruption. Well, it was formed, and that's about it. Kalafi can maybe have a comment on that as well. And to bring an academic and a teaching perspective to the issues in the region, we have Jalendra Singh, who is a senior lecturer at Coordinated Journalism at the University of South Pacific in Suva. Jalendra gained his doctorate at the University of Queensland. He's lectured on many issues from media law and ethics. He holds a Master's of Business Administration. He was the former editor of the Review of Business and a content editor for Fiji Live and associate editor for the Daily Post. And is currently consulting editor for May Life magazine and an inter-press service correspondent. And he has a huge research interest. The one that he's really interested in looking at is corruption. So we're very, very fortunate to have someone like him, his experience, and now his teaching abilities to bring to this discussion. Now, after the presenters have presented for, say, 12 minutes, gentlemen, is that right, 12 minutes? I'm going to just, when they all sit down, I want to ask them some questions directly, because they actually, in fact, you can ask some questions amongst yourselves, because there may be some issues that are appearing in your country which may be relevant for the rest of us to hear from your perspective. So what's happening in PNG? Are there similar issues happening in Fiji? I should tell you that Jalendra told me last night he feels a bit like Jesus. He's from Fiji, and the Colonel has very acute hearing, even at this distance. So if he speaks in parables, you will understand why. So after this sort of presentation here, I'm going to ask a senior staff member of Auckland University Technology, Dr. Kamil Nakid, to essentially just to wrap up the themes, the common threads in our discussions, essentially as a summary of our deliberations here this afternoon, and so that we can finish at least sharing some common ground as to what we've learned and some of the challenges we are going to have to address going forward. And then hopefully, God willing, we will finish it when we should be finishing at 5:30. So the first person I'm going to call on to speak is the veteran media person, Fuimaono. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good to be here with you this afternoon. It's been a little over 28 years since I've been involved in starting a little newspaper called the Taimi o Tonga. It's a Tongan language newspaper. And when we started the newspaper, we didn't know much about how to run a newspaper. And we were the first newspaper that came into being in the Kingdom of Tonga. The only other newspaper was the government-owned newspaper called the Chronicle. So we were the first independent or non-government or non-church newspaper. As you can see, this was a fairly difficult situation. But over the last almost 30 years, in other words, 3 decades of being involved not only in the newspaper, but more recently with radio as well, and other things in Tonga, we felt that dealing with corruption was the thing to do in those first 10 years of the newspaper. We were trying to uncover every little dirty thing that was happening within government or the leaders in Tonga, and even with church leaders and so on. We were just looking at Tongan society and say there's a lot of things that's not right here. We've got to expose this, and this is a way of bringing changes. And we did. The first things we did was uncovering the situation where Tongan passports and citizenship was sold to the Chinese overseas, and that was a big thing. That the government collected about $35 million at the end of something that they were doing illegally. 1991, there was a special parliamentary session in Tonga to discuss how they could legitimize the issuing of Tongan passports to the Chinese. And of course, they were looking at Hong Kong being free from British rule at the time, going back to China, and they thought, well, there's a lot of Hong Kong people that wants another passport for travel. And so the Tongans, being very good opportunists, thought that this is something to do. Let's sell the passports. It's just that they forgot that it's against the laws of Tonga to do so. And not only that, but you have to be a